Hey, John.
Are you going to do the video?
Yeah.
Okay.
We are recording. Oh, wait. We've got a couple people. Hello, welcome to our virtual vineyard tours. This is exciting. We want to make sure that everybody can get in, that including our winemaker, because we are having, because it's Red Willow, we're doing the chapel block from Owen Rowe, and we have to make sure that David O'Reilly can get in to talk about the wine with us. So there we go. We are going to welcome David in 1 second. But thanks everybody for joining us. This is, here we go. Here's David, I think. So we have the wine, and we will talk about the wine briefly, but we do not want anybody to stand on ceremony. We don't want anybody thirsty while we're having this conversation. So pour yourself a glass if you haven't already. Hi, Dave. There we go. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
I am Carrie Shields. I'm the moderator. My family has planted and grows DeBrule Vineyard, and we also have Cote Bonneville Winery. Our featured vineyard for this vineyard tour today is Jonathan Sauer, who probably needs no introduction, not for me at least. He's a fourth generation farmer, farming family, and all around well-known, well-loved guy. We love John. Everybody loves John. We also have Marshall Edwards, who farms down in over in Red Mountain at Quintessence. He has also been farming growing grapes for about 30 years. He was named in 2017. The Washington wine industry named him the Grower of the Year, and in 2018 he was an honorary grower again. So he's very well recognized and well respected in the industry. And so this is a really cool opportunity for you guys to get a chance to talk to him. And then we also have David O'Reilly, who's the winemaker for Owen Rowe, owner, founder, winemaker for Owen Rowe. And he's been getting grapes from Red Willow for a long, long time. And so we are enjoying this Chapel Block Syrah, which is I think it's one of the iconic wines of Red Willow. And so we will, like I said, we'll be talking about all these things later. If you have questions, we want to answer your questions. We want this to be interactive. So go over to the chat and put your questions there. You can either direct them to me privately, but go ahead and direct them to everybody, and we'll all be watching and we'll all chime in and answer. So the first thing that we want to do is show a little bit of an introduction to the Yakima Valley. So there's a wonderful video that was put together a couple of years ago, and it is there's so much footage of Red Willow, of the chapel, of Jonathan, because he's such a wonderful human being. So we wanted to show you this video.
The world, and it's just, we've just come such a long ways.
That's the end of it.
Wine growing in the Yakima Valley really began in the late 1800s, but in earnest just before Prohibition. The first wine grapes were planted on Snipes Mountain in 1917, and if not for that start, we don't know what really would have happened with wine in this region.
People have a hard time comprehending that a single region can do so many varietals so well.
The Yakima Valley is one of the best places to grow grapes. We have very warm days, which means that the grapes can ripen
fully and get nice ripe fruit flavors, and then cool nights, which retain the acidity because the grapes go to sleep at night.
The wines that come out of here are incredibly complex and very important to the wine industry.
You know, you look at our latitude, here we are in the same latitude, spun the globe around as famous growing regions of the world, Burgundy and Bordeaux. It's 46 parallel.
The Yakima Valley is the first AVA in Washington State. It produces the most wine grapes, and it produces the best wine grapes in the entire Pacific Northwest.
All right, and then the next thing we wanted to show, because we're here talking about the Yakima Valley and moving through the valley. Whoops, that's not it. Sorry.
Wow. I didn't remember that part. That was kind of cool.
There is, oh, here we go. This one. So we're here talking about the Yakima Valley, and one of the challenges with the Yakima Valley, if you haven't been here, is, or even if you, it's such a large region and it's hard to wrap your head around sometimes. I mean, you could put Napa this way from north to south. The Yakima Valley is, DeBrule Vineyard is here in the middle, and Sunnyside's here in the middle, about halfway. It takes us half hour, 45 minutes to get both the Yakima and over to Red Mountain. So it's really a long distance, and there's a lot of diversity in this growing region. And by going from Red Willow all the way over here on the west over to Red Mountain over here on the east, we want to take you for the next couple of weeks through a journey of the valley and get all these different perspectives on why it's such a wonderful place, why we all love growing grapes here, and some of the cool stories and the people behind the vineyards. So we're going to take you from this bird's eye view of the Yakima Valley, which you can see how important irrigation is. In where we have water, you can grow things. Where there is no water, it's brown, and you can't grow things. So pretty much on the western edge of this is, we'll go over to Red Willow. And it is about as far west as you can get, right up against the mountains. If you haven't been there, we look forward to having a vineyard tour, a vineyard event in person, in real life, when we can all do that safely again, because it's a beautiful spot. And so with that introduction, I am going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Carrie. I think you should have had the Wild Wild West song instead of the other one. And I don't know what it was, but, welcome to the western end of the Yakima Valley. You know, I'm just really, I'm just so humbled to be able to do this, and you know, just we're a small vineyard, and to be sitting here sharing our story, and it's just I really appreciate all of you taking the time, and David and Marshall and Carrie, and just I really look forward to looking at this wine a little more in depth with you, David. I thought I'd pull a little bit of an audible on you, Carrie, and just start with a fun story. So it was quite a few years ago in the winter time. Dad, he gets this phone call out of the blue, and it's a guy named Jeff, and he says, "Hi, Mike. You've never met me. I'm calling from Texas, and man, I would really love to propose to my girlfriend in your chapel." And you see, there's a little more to the story, and I'd like to do it right at Valentine's Day. And see, we were having dinner one night at just a really nice restaurant, and we were sharing a bottle of a Red Willow designated wine. And it was just kind of at that moment, we just knew we were in love with each other. And, you know, I mean, what do you say to that, right? So he's like, sure, Jeff, you know, if you can make it up for Texas, go for it. So sure enough, Valentine's Day rolls around, and Jeff studied, you know, our latitude, everything. He got it right. He showed up, and somehow he gave Beth an excuse to come to Yakima and get pampered, and probably to go to Las Hernandez or something to get a tamale. But I don't know. But so anyway, Jeff has a little trail of rose petals going into the chapel. He had a photographer drive over from Seattle to take pictures, and Beth shows up in a limousine and right at sunset, and he proposes. And the crazy part is what she says. It's like, what? She says yes, of course. So anyway, she says yes. So I just love that story. It just how wine brings people together, and in good times, in a time of quarantine, whatever. Here we are. We're going to learn something today about our valley. We're together, in a digital way. I'd much rather be out in the vineyard with you guys and showing you the stones and everything. But here we are, and I just really appreciate it. And I especially really love just a vineyard designates. And to me, like the chapel block, it's such a special wine. It just captures that sense of place, that sense of terroir, the vintage that it was picked, and just all the hands that went into it. And I think it's just a perfect wine to be showcasing Red Willow. The more I learn about Eastern Washington and specifically Yakima Valley, just the more I'm amazed at what a really unique world-class region this is. Our trouble is we're just babies. When my dad started the vineyard back in the early 70s, there was like 6 wineries here at the time. Something that goes back to antiquity and over in France, the Romans built that wall and we got vineyards. We're just getting started, but we've come such a long ways. And I look at our valley and the components of it. It isn't a single thing that a person can point to and say, aha, it's the hills, or it's the geology, it's the climate, it's the diurnal shift, it's the research, it's the irrigation. It's kind of like having an orchestra in front of you, and Carrie and Marshall and I are just, up there trying not to drop the baton, right? Is that what you call it, a baton? Anyway, we're just kind of up there, and the beauty of growing so many varieties is that on a given year, one might be the star. There was just kind of more of a support variety the year before. We're just we can grow anything, we can ripen just about anything, and it's just an amazing valley to be a grower in. I kind of wonder what last year, what the movement would have been. I maybe more of a brass year or something. I don't know, but some of us are still kind of recovering from it. But there were some great wines that came from it. I remember a week ago, Michael Savage from Savage Grace Winery came out and visited, and he brought his bottle of Sauv Blanc out, and it's from the 19 vintage, and I was just amazed. It was just beautiful, just wonderful wine. Did great on that year, and it's something out of Sauterne, or anyway, it was the Sauv Blanc region of. Anyway, it's just a beautiful wine, and all together. So my goal this evening is just to really try to weave our story with the Yakima Valley, and then we can kind of talk about the wine, and then kind of finish off with just general questions, and we'll kind of answer them as we go along too. And then we'll also talk about what's going on in the vineyard with Carrie, Marshall, and I, and David. So anyway, as we go through it, enjoy your wine, kind of sip on it, and I'll just kind of go into stories. So we're part of a family farm. I'd be 4th generation. I think Carrie has a picture of that beginning somewhere. So there's my great grandfather, Clyde, who started the farm back in the 20s, and it wasn't the COVID 20s, it was the roaring 20s. right at that time, they were bringing the irrigation into our fertile valley, and a lot of it was being dug by mules and horseback and the meandering canals that you have today. So it needed irrigation that was being developed, and that's when great-grandfather settled the area. He started the farm, kind of cattle, some potatoes, and a little bit of alfalfa, I think. The next generation came along. My grandfather, he grew the farm quite a bit. It was successful in alfalfa seed. And it was at that point he was growing the farm that a parcel came up adjoining it. And it's where Red Willow is now. And he bought it kind of more for the lower area, which was great farm ground. And really where the farm is, it wasn't good for any kind of agriculture. It's just the soil is too poor. And so it just sat idle, sagebrush. So the next generation comes along, my mother. So my dad, just out of college, he married into the Stevenson family, and he was looking for a job. So, he started pretty much as a hired hand. And Dad got intrigued with Concords, and he decided, I'm gonna get into that. So he planted 30 acres of Concords, and he figured, well, while I'm trying it, I had to throw a few wine grapes in there as well. So he planted a couple rows of Semillon and Chenin Blanc. Well, the Concords did great. They loved the good fertile soil down in the lower area, but the first winter comes along and the vinifera grapes went back to the ground. So Dad really learned his first lesson that really you got to put wine grapes up on the hills. So he had a little trail 90 to be going around the farm, checking the weather and figuring out where the warm areas were. So maybe we'll kind of pause there. So Yakima Valley is an incredible valley. So we're just blessed with this great mountain range. You can probably take that picture off, Carrie.
I'll put some other hills up there for you.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, that'll work. So our Yakima Valley was just this amazing mountain range along the whole length of it. So 90 miles, starting from Red Willow all the way to Red Mountain, and just beautiful hills, south facing, and really what hills give you is frost protection, and in the winter, we can have cold winters, is cold protection. Marshall, you probably know this. You get into a fall day and it might be warm in the daytime, and you're riding your four-wheeler and you go down into the lower area and you're just like, it's freezing. You got it really changed it. What cold air is kind of like water. It just settles into the low areas. So you have that degree of protection. It brings unique soils. You get lower production and really it's just more quality oriented you get from the hills. Dad he was in the National Guard, and he had a friend at the time who came to him one day and said, Mike, I have a problem. I have a pickup load of Cabernet Sauvignon cuttings that he actually got from Harrison Hill. Somebody backed out on it, and I don't have a home for it. Would you be interested in it? And well, Dad had been kind of scouting the weather and the farm, and we had these hills way up there, and Dad said, yeah, absolutely. And so he bought the truck and the cuttings anyway, and he went up, planted our first cab in 1973, about 3 acres of it. It was kind of...
John, can you remind us, Idrish wanted to know when you planted the Concords?
71. Okay. So that was, 1971. So yeah, Dad went and planted the cab. It was kind of, I think he said he planted a lot of it by hand, post hole digger, and it was a lot of work. Today we do a lot of, we will rip it and do a lot more prep and stuff, but that's what he had. He did, said the first few years he used hand line, just kind of, put it up there and to get him going and everything. So maybe we could talk about irrigation a little bit, and I'll kind of draw you into it, Marshall, too, and you, Carrie, and just our valley being able to irrigate the vines is so huge. And I asked Dad, how did you irrigate those early vines? And said, right at that time when he planted them, drip irrigation was developed, and he was one of the first ones in our valley to try it. And so he kind of got into drip irrigation in those early years. And they didn't have things like pressure compensating emitters. So I asked him, well, how do you, because you get up on a hill as you're irrigating it, the bottom of the hill gets more pressure. So it's just going to put more water on the plants, which is the exact wrong place to put water on the bottom of the hill on the plants. So it said they would scale the drip tubing down as you went down the hill. So you'd have a section at, yay big, and it would get a little smaller. So that was kind of their way to do it. And it worked, it worked pretty good. Irrigation is just one of the biggest factors of a quality for Washington State. And, one thing, if you over irrigate a vine, it can become like this monster. Okay. You have this huge vine, it'll just wants to grow and grow and grow. The fruit will be just like green and big berries, big clusters. You'll have disease problems. Leaf hoppers will be attacking it, and you'll have mildew, showing up, and it's just, it becomes like this crazy monster. But we're in this desert region. So we have the benefit. We can pull the reins back and really kind of control that water in so many ways. And it's probably the biggest factor for Washington's consistency of vintages year after year is that controlling the water. And you affect canopy growth, you affect berry size, you have reduced disease pressure, insect pressure. There's just so many things. Marshall, you have any thoughts on irrigating?
Yeah, you've, and I don't know how many people know this, but the valley, we only average 7 inches of rainfall a year, and most of that comes in the wintertime, really, with the snow. So if you look at what we can control with irrigation, drip irrigation is everything. I believe that irrigation in the vines is the most important thing we do in the vineyard, really, to control the canopies. A lot of other regions in the world, they aren't even allowed to irrigate, so they are just relying on what Mother Nature gives them. We can control all the vigor in the plants from start to finish with the irrigation, and I think that's just it's such a huge thing. And irrigation systems have changed so much. Jonathan was talking about the pressure compensating emitters, and I mean, now the emitter sizes have gotten so small, so we can water a huge amount of acreage. We've got what is called a variable speed pumps. They call them V drives. So at Quintessence, I can turn on the whole 300 acres, or I can go down to 5 acres and water a 5-acre block if I want to. So it's all of these little tools that has improved over the years that I think has just upped our quality even more and more as a lot of these new things have evolved.
Yeah, well, and I think, Marshall, to your point, the fact that we get so little irrigation is really unique in the world, because in many places in Europe you can't irrigate, but in a lot of places where they do irrigate, like in California and in Australia, they're not as dry in the winter. So they go into this time of year with a lot of moisture in the soil profile. And this is the time of year when you really want to be able to control your irrigation and make sure that your grapes aren't so wet. Because pretty soon when those grape berries are growing and they're going to get as big as Jonathan was saying, the fact that this is the time of year when we can control irrigation, this is when we can keep our canopies small, we can keep the berry size small. This first part of the year, even in being so dry, is really unique in irrigated agriculture, and it's really one of those. I mean, if there is one key factor that makes the Yakima Valley such a great growing region year in and year out, it's the fact that we don't get that water over the winter, and we can really control vine size and cluster size for the rest of the growing season.
And the other thing too about wine grapes and how we irrigate, we are the most efficient crop using irrigation water, because we do not water. It doesn't take a lot of water to ripen a crop of wine grapes compared to, as big as the apple industry is in the valley, or hops. How much water they use. We are very efficient with the amount of water that we use.
So,
yeah.
John, can you tell us a little bit about when we know we grow a lot of different things, and I know you grow more than we do. So can you tell us which varietals you grow, how much your Cab Syrah, what your other big ones are, kind of how many acres, and how big is Red Willow in general, just so we have kind of a better idea of what Red Willow looks like from a farming perspective?
Yeah, I'll kind of get into the varieties in a second. So we also grow Conkers. We have a little bit of hay as well. Still very much family farm, and in fact, I was just out there planting a nursery a little bit ago, so out in the mud playing around. And so we're about 150 acres of wine grapes, and 80 acres of Conkers and 30 of hay. So we're not that big, but it's enough to keep us busy. So get a little bit into their history. So Dad, after he planted the first 73 cab, he was introduced to Dr. Clore, now revered as the father of the Washington wine industry. And Dr. Clore planted a little experimental plot out in our vineyard, about a dozen varieties. And at that time, this is the late 70s, early 80s, the emphasis was what varieties would be suitable, and mostly which ones would survive the winters the best. Look at the varieties. A lot of them I've never heard of. One of them was Cab Franc. Ricasatelli, I guess, was another one, grown in Ukraine area. So they had this little plot going on, and they would take the wine and make a carboy of it. The university and just kind of rate it, I guess. A bunch of professors would, I don't know, probably have a good time and put a number rating on it. And anyway, we were in this little area at a White Swan, and we always did really good, kind of rose up there. So that was kind of, Dad was introduced Dr. Clore, and then about 1978, he got his first contract with Associated Vintners. And then it was right about that time that this group of professors that worked for the UW, I guess, decided they wanted to take the next step in their evolution of the winery. So they went out and recruited a young master of wine named David Lake, which was really unheard of at the time for a master of wine to want to be a winemaker. And so it was that time Dad and David really latched onto each other and really worked together and developed our vineyard really to what it is over the course of over 30 years. So Dad had just the passion and the drive, and David just this worldwide perspective of what wine is and could be in this kind of classical discipline. They began working together, and it was a few years down the road. I should mention about 1981, David started the first state designates as well. He did Otis, Sagemore, and Red Willow. So there's actually cabs that you could trace all the way back to 1981. Which is pretty cool. That'd be a long lineup, but anyways, so. A few years later, Dad, he was in harvest one day, and he was working, and this guy drives up and gets out and talking 100 miles an hour, and he had a bottle of Barolo in one hand, and he said, "Hi, my name's Peter Dow, and I really want you to plant Nebbiolo for me. And I've got a restaurant over in Kirkland called Cafe Juanita," and Dad was kind of like, "Well, that's nice. I'm kind of busy right now at harvest." So anyway, a little while later, Dad was in Yakima, a wine shop, and talking to a lady. And you ever heard of a place called Cafe Juanita and a wine called Barolo, and she's like, oh my gosh, yeah, Cafe Juanita, that's one of the best restaurants over in Seattle area, and there's like a month waiting list to get in there, and Barolo is just one of the classical wines of the world. Well, that intrigued Dad, so he looked into it and said, you know, I'm going to plant some, and we've still got it today, the old Nebbiolo planting, the acre of it. And anyway, David Lake heard that we were planting Nebbiolo, and he's like, you know, Mike, I think another variety which would be better suited for you guys and your climate and everything would be Syrah, and I think you ought to really think about that one. So Dad said, yeah, you know, I'll do that. And he chose what some of our better ground, a good south slope, and just a beautiful view. And Syrah, they say in the old world, Syrah loves a view. Well, a lot of our Syrah vineyards have great views, as David knows. Anyway, I think, Carrie, you got another picture. Why don't you put that up? And so this picture is about David Lake and not that one.
Not that one. Sorry.
Nah, not that one. That one, yeah. So David is on the left. Mike's the one kneeling down. That's my father. And then the Columbia cellar crew is behind him. So they came out one day and planted a few rows of Syrah, had a barbecue, and David went into his wine cellar. He brought some Hermitage and Coach Roadie out, and they enjoyed some wine and food, and that was the planting of the first Syrah in the state. And the story is, after the bottles were empty, of course, they went up to the top of the vineyard, dug a couple of holes, and buried the bottles so that the vines would know what they should be doing and thinking. So that's the founding of Syrah in Washington State. And from there, it led to just so many varieties. So that kind of opened the floodgates, and Dad was intrigued, and you know, I was like, what else can grow in Washington State? And I think it was in '96, we had a cold winter, and Syrah survived it. And that's kind of when the floodgates were open for the rest of the state as well. But so Dad got into Sangiovese, Malbec, Tempranillo, Mourvèdre, Viognier. He just pioneered so many varieties for the state. And so let's see here.
I love it's a memory, but we were having lunch one day, and Wade Wolf, who helped plant our vineyard, who was one of the preeminent viticulturalists when our vineyard was planted, and Jonathan and I were sitting down after lunch, and I said, I wonder where we got our Syrah vines from. And Wade said, well, we planted them in 1992, so they would have come from we got them from this nursery who got their vineyard cuttings from Red Willow, and then they proceeded to track the vines in our vineyard, which came later, not only back to Red Willow, but all the way back to France. So it was such a mind-blowing moment to me, not only for our vineyard and all the relationships that and what cool people we have in the Yakima Valley, but also the fact that it's, to Jonathan's point earlier of the time in the region right now, like, it's so amazing to think that Red Willow and the Sauers are some of the people who helped create the Washington wine industry and really made it who they are, what made all of us who we are. And so I think that it's really cool to sit down and talk to John all the time. And not only because we got grapes from you, but that just makes it that much more special.
Yeah, it's a great grape for thanks, Carrie. And you know, our climate, we can grow so many different things so well. We don't struggle ripening most things. I mean, there's given years that it's pretty cold, and sometimes we're at that threshold. But for the most part, the winemakers can go out and part of our magic, I think, is the months of September and October. They're just, you know, our days, we have these really efficient days in the summer, and then right at that time, you know, our day length's really shortening up. It's getting cooler. The nights are always dropping. We have this natural diurnal shift. So we have cool nights. Everybody knows you just open your window at night and it feels great. And that kind of helps to maintain that natural acidity within Washington wines. Usually a lot of harvests, a winemaker's out there and picking the date and when they want to pick those grapes. It's not, because the rain clouds are coming or some other factor. And that's a great advantage that we have. Maybe we can focus on Syrah a little bit. Just a little on Syrah. I think it's one of the most terroir-driven varieties that we have. It's incredible, and you could pick it early, you could pick it late. It'll do great. In fact, we've got Owen Rowe. You tend to be on the early side, David. Gramercy, they're on the early side, and we got others like Betts and Structure, and they're on the later. And I mean, they're all just great wines, very different. You can blend it. You can make a DSM out of it. You can add stems. You can put it on concrete. You can co-ferment it with a white grape, like the Northern Rhone does. There's just so many things that you can do with a Syrah, but I think Syrah shows a site's terroir as much as about any variety can. And David, you get 6 different blocks of Syrah, and that we have, and I'm sure I could take all of those, put them in front of you blind, and you would know which one they were. No doubt you can do that.
I don't want to be challenged like that by you, John.
I think this would be a good time to kind of let you take over for a bit, David, and talk about the wine.
Well, I do have an audible as well, Jonathan, for you. So many years ago, my older brother, who lived in France for many years, he had asked me. He had met a lovely young lady, and they were getting married, and so for his wedding reception, he wanted a great wine, but he wanted it American, but something with a nod to the old world. And this is back in the in the 80s, and I kind of mentally was, when I was going around to wine shops selling wines that I had made, I was always looking out for that wine that had a foot in the old world and one in the new. The wine that I chose was a 1983 Columbia Winery Red Willow Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, great! Wow.
And it was I won't tell you what I paid for it, because I charge a lot more for those grapes now than you did. But it was exceptional, and then obviously this is way before I had ever had a chance to meet you, so and work with the vineyard. But not only do I work with Syrah from different aspects and different soil types and elevation at Red Willow, I work with Syrah throughout the Yakima Valley, and I've worked with it in the Horse Heaven Hills, and also when I made wine in California. And I think what really sets Red Willow so distinctly apart from many other areas is that you get this gorgeous, Syrah is a bit of a chameleon, and as Jonathan, as you were saying, it really does tend to really show the soil that is grown on. And obviously there's so many different aspects around the world and around great growing areas that grow Syrah. And I think what really sets Red Willow apart, the first thing is when you just smell it. You smell this gorgeous perfume, and for me, it's a grape that can tend to get very ripe and alcoholic. You can also get tannic, and really it can be effusively fruity. But this has got this beautiful, almost a violet lavender note in the nose, and for me, it's the aromatic that I'm always looking for. It's got a lovely savory note, a spicy component that you get, and probably more than any other block of Syrah that I have ever worked with, you get this gorgeous burst of blue fruit in the palate, this beautiful fruitiness and lovely texture. And I always get texture out of higher elevation sites in Yakima Valley, because usually the higher the elevation, you're not getting quite as warm days, and so you're not getting these kind of baked in tannins into the skins, and which is very easy to get with Syrah. And you get this long kind of spicy, gorgeous fruity finish. But again, for me, I'm always, when I'm trying to pick out a red Willow Syrah in the lineup, it's that little bit of violet in the nose that always is the telltale aromatic from red Willow. And so all of those elements together, year in and year out, really conspire to make this. I truly think this is one of the great locations of Syrah in the world.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the fruit, David, because you were mentioning all the other components, the floral, the spice, the texture, and I'm like, is he going to talk about the fruit? Because it's really lovely and beautiful. I'm waiting for it.
It definitely it just explodes from the in the palate and from the glass, and that's really an element overall in Yakima Valley. I mean, that's what we have in spades, is just a purity of fruit that a lot of it is what Jonathan was describing, the that day night diurnal shift and keeping the freshness in there. So we have no issues at all getting ripeness, but what we do is we keep those aromatic esters in the grape. And when we're harvesting, it normally is cool in the fall, so they're not getting baked out. And so it's just, you get these gorgeous, complex, fruity wines. And again, it's really hard to beat this in a Syrah anywhere. I mean, you look at the great growing areas of Syrah in the world, and and there's few that you can get, all of those elements contained into one. Usually you'll have one that'll be savory or peppery or alcoholic, but this is just seamless. It's a seamless Syrah.
I agree with that.
David, how much do you get some of those characteristics on the different slopes? Maybe I can give a little background. So the picture that you have here, that's the west slope. Carrie, you had another picture. Maybe you could just show it really quick.
I can show that quickly.
Okay. So we have really steep vineyards. Okay. So that picture, you're looking at Mount Adams in the background. So that's the east slope. And so David's got both blocks. He's also got the south slope. and there, you could throw a baseball from one to the other, and just very different. They ripen at different times. Maybe you can, is that some of your layers that you're talking about, David, from the different slopes?
Absolutely. Having the different aspects. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if that's...
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, having the different aspects really does help in consistency from year to year. So in a really, really hot year, maybe, your blend is a little more oriented to the east. So you're not getting quite the evening, sun, and not maybe kind of mitigating some of the tannins that might be evident in the west. And then, we looked at this too when we went through. So we will kind of put the West Chapel block in a tasting, and then the East and the South, and then the shoulder parts of the blocks. And the attempt is simply to make a seamless, delicious wine. There's no other. It's not, hey, this is red Willow, this is what we're trying to do. It's just to make the perfect wine. And then what we will do afterwards, then we'll take a look at the blend and we'll say, you know what, this is exactly what this year gave us. So in 15, for example, which was the hottest year on record, we had very little of the West in there. We had a lot more of the East block. And then in 11, we had 2/3 of it was West block, because it was a very, very cool year, and that block got to be beautifully ripe. And so, from a winemaker's perspective, you're a little bit of a chef, in the spice cabinet, and sometimes you need a little pepper, And so you'll go to the west. Sometimes you'll need a little more fruit, and so it's really it's a winemaker's dream to to work with these different blocks. And as Jonathan, as you were saying, sometimes the difference, even though you have to have a pretty good arm, but they're a baseball throw, apart. Sometimes you pick them 2 weeks apart, and
Yeah.
and that's huge. I mean, 2 weeks
Yeah.
in Washington State is is the difference between maybe the low at night being 35 versus 55 degrees, and so that has a real key element in hang time and phenolics and in in that textural component that we love, that we winemakers love to exhibit in our wines.
So,
Mm.
David, we have a question about alcohol. And since we're talking about picking decisions, I know that neither you nor I look for high alcohol wines and ripeness, and that's not always a major differentiator on what we make our picking decisions on. And I noticed this is a very reasonable, and I appreciate this, 14.1% alcohol. So can you talk a little bit, I'm going to paraphrase Paul's question. Sorry, Paul. Can you paraphrase a little bit how you make picking decisions based on sugar, based on flavor, acidity, tan structure? What do you look for when you're making those decisions, and why would you wait 2 weeks between this part of the picking, this part of the vineyard, and that part of the vineyard?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we always have in mind at harvest time, because even though we're way up in Washington State, I mean, invariably, especially with the last few years, I mean, we have had early harvests. The chapel block that I have is the 16 vintage, and the 16 vintage we were picking the first blocks in the chapel block in August, which is unbelievably early. Well, August is still prime ripening time, and you can still get quite a bit of sugar accumulation. So from a winemaker's perspective, if you're trying to shoot for a yummy wine, and you're all about balance, you can't necessarily just go out there and let it hang and get these incredibly ripe flavors, because then the sugars are going to get away on you, and then the eventual wine that you're going to make is going to be dominated by alcohol. And alcohol, while we all love it, is it's really it can dominate the aromatic. It can take away, especially if you let it hang for a long time, and obviously as that sugar accumulates, I mean, it's going to the resulting wine is going to be higher in alcohol, so you tend to lose a little bit of those beautiful fresh aromatics, and then the fruit complexity in the palate can go from kind of that ripe dark Bing cherry to more blackberry notes, and then it gets into kind of pruny flavors, and it reminds me of my grandmother's prune juice after a while, and it's not necessarily what you want to have in your wine glass. And again, what I want is from year in and year out is a wine that you can go to, and you see that chapel on the label, you're going to have a friend, and you're going to have Jonathan was talking about how consistent our season is, and we can get into the fall, and invariably it's very, very dry. We get cooler daytime temperatures, and so you're not getting massive sugar accumulation. But a winemaker has to make decisions. Mother Nature doesn't just tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, now it's time to pick. You have to look at your style, you have to look at your site, and make decisions that will give you the best chance to make the most balanced product. And Carrie, you're right. I mean, you don't want to have something that's 16-17% alcohol, or something that's so ripe you have to start adding water to it again to to tone back your alcohol. So we would much rather work with Mother Nature and then just pick it right at the right time. And that's why you work with vineyards like Red Willow and De Brule that are small enough that they can go into each little block and say, those 5 rows that comprise this block, we can pick it today. And the big vineyards can't do that. It's just not possible.
But I mean, if you're picking Red Willow in August, you don't pick DeBrule until middle of September at least. And then Marshall, when are you, David, do you get fruit from Red Mountain? I don't think so. But Marshall, when do you guys pick?
No, I don't. No.
So for us, I mean, it's kind of crazy. We can be picking cab depending on the clone of cab that we have. Our early ripening clones, we're usually starting right after the 1st of September. I mean, we can be on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th. We're picking cab usually first, and then we end with cab. It's at the end of harvest. It's kind of 2 months later we finish with cab. So it's kind of yeah. We can be very early on Red Mountain though, very early.
So do you guys out there listening have any more questions? I know we're getting some, but I know it looks like you're all enjoying the wine, as are we.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite things, as an aside about low alcohol, is if this wine were 15 or 16% alcohol, especially if it said 15% alcohol on the label, it would be much harder for me to be drinking as much as I want to and still be talking to all of you. So we love our low alcohol wines. Does Marshall grow Syrah? Do you guys just grow Cab or do you grow Syrah?
No, we have Syrah too. Yeah, not a lot. Most of Red Mountain that we have, we're probably 80% Cabernet, but I've got a few blocks of Syrah spread around Red Mountain. Actually, Quintessence, I have about 10 acres or so of Syrah that we grow there. Some up on the very top. We just planted a block for JM Cellars on our Shaw 32 vineyard that's on the very tip top of Red Mountain. I mean, right to the AVA line on the very top of the ridge, and some real shallow, rocky soil. This will be the first crop off of it this year. I think it's going to be some really, really interesting stuff. We planted Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre for John up there. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to get the crop off of it.
Yeah, in general, Red Willow is it's more of a cooler site. But it throws some winemakers, it throws them off. We tend to be earlier ripening on some of our hillsides. I think part of that is during the summer, if the vine gets over 90 degrees or so, it usually will shut down. It'll go into that self-preservation mode, and which can actually delay your season. Well, we tend to be kind of a little more, in that efficient range. So they'll kind of keep trucking along, and also your steep hills can affect your ripening too a little bit. So a lot of times the winemakers are surprised. They're like, "Man, we're starting to pick on Red Mountain. Like, what do you mean your grapes are already on Red Willow? You guys are cooler." I'm like, "I know we're cooler, but." It's these blocks, or and I don't know. We tend to have pretty low yields and stuff as well. But yeah, it kind of takes people by surprise a lot of times. What's funny in that Chapel block is between like the east and the west. The west is you would think that'd be the first to ripen. It's hotter. It gets that afternoon sunshine and the east, it's in shade when that sun's going down. But actually, it's the east. It's always the early one. It just kind of that morning sunlight. It wakes up and gets trucking, and just kind of keeps going. So it's a little counterintuitive. I guess a little on our soils. Maybe I could talk a little bit about that. So we're a high elevation vineyard. We're between 1,100 and 1,300 feet elevation. I think that's about where you are, Carrie, isn't it?
Yeah, about the same.
About there. David, you're probably pretty similar in Union Gap. I don't know. And then
we are, yes, same.
Okay. Marshall, I'm curious. I noticed Vineyards going down by the freeway, and then you got stuff on top of the mountain. What is that range?
Yeah, so the range from the Bigelow, the JM Cellars block that I was talking about, that's at 1,200. That's at 1,200 feet to the top, and then we're down to 650 feet at the bottom of the vineyard.
Okay. Quintessence is kind of right in the middle, or
Yeah, the top of Quintessence is 1,000 feet, and then it's right down to about 650 feet at the bottom of
Okay.
and you really
Okay.
notice the difference between just what you were talking about, Jonathan, with the slopes, the upper part of the vineyard ripening ahead of, which is nice. I mean, it's 300 acres, so we've got to handpick all of them, majority of that, and so it's nice that it kind of spreads out harvest, and the clones help us too, but it really does spread out where we've got so much Cabernet to get picked.
Yeah, we kind of spread harvest out with just all of our varieties that we have. So it's usually well, last year was how long? It was over 6 weeks, I think, last year, but typically it's a little over a month as a harvest. So
it's an interesting point, though, that there's a pretty big differentiation between our lower elevations, John, where you're at, and where we're at, and Marshall's lower elevation, because as you go down the valley, it makes sense. The river runs downhill, and the Yakima River runs from the west to the east. So you get kind of the same functional elevation of number of feet above the valley floor, which I think is a more relevant number than absolute elevation. As you're going from when the river goes down, the hills go down. And so I mean, at 600 feet, we're growing Concords in Sunnyside because you can't grow vinifera. And the valley goes down as you go along the river and as you go towards the east. And so that's a really, sometimes when people just think about the numbers, they forget that, rivers flow downhill. So the whole valley goes downhill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really deceiving. A lot of times you swear a vineyard or a box higher, but like, no, actually the elevation's higher up there. Just the valley is just that general uplift. I asked a lot about kind of soils, and it's a hard one to answer at Red Willow. We have such diversity. I was talking a little bit about like the East Chapel and the West Chapel, and so we're right about the bottom third of our vineyard was impacted by these Lake Missoula floods that came in and deposited this material, and then 2/3 of our vineyard were above it, which go back millions of years, 10 to 12 million years, and you have this kind of Ellensburg formation, and a lot of those higher vineyards, they're just more ancient soils. We have a lot of, I brought a couple props here. So there's a lot of like sandstone. You have, okay, there you go. So that's like a compressed ash, okay? And you get it, you break it up pretty easily once it gets exposed to the weather and everything. And but you kind of have that through it. You get a lot of these. Carrie, you probably got some of these.
You have to lift them this way.
I can't get it right.
It looks like river rocks to me.
Okay. Porcitic pebbles, so you get a lot of those throughout the vineyard, and those are actually evidence of the ancient Columbia River that went through our vineyard, which is kind of mind-boggling because it's so far to the south today. And another thing is these little hummus. Do you guys have that in your guys? You probably don't.
Not that size.
You guys don't? Okay, a geologist once said it's really light, and said they're more direct projectiles out of the volcano. So they didn't go very far down the valley, but they're all throughout our vineyard. So there's a lot of this pumice stone. We had the wine commission at a tour years ago. It was a group from Japan, and it was kind of fun because one of them, he picked up the stone and, oh, can I keep this? And I'm like, oh, sure. He's like, oh, in Japan, you sell these for like $20 or so. Right? And I'm like, really? Maybe we're in the wrong business here. I don't know. I guess you use them to, take off calluses or something. You knew that, Marshall, right? So,
yeah.
Anyways.
Hey, Jonathan,
I didn't know that.
Use that on your head.
What's that? Anyway, so we have
you should use that on your head. It's shiny.
Use it on your head, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, I know. Right? I can take this bowl off.
John, I've got a picture here. What part of the soils are those?
Okay, that's kind of that sandstone. All the little rocks you see, that's little pumice throughout it. So it was really hard to develop a lot of these vineyards. Dad had to get a big old cat and about blew it up a couple times, and it just kind of lifted out of the ground. But once you kind of expose them, drive over them, they break down. And so I mean, there's gravel areas, there's this pumicey sandstone areas. We've got a vineyard less than a mile away. It's more of a sandy, kind of a sandy loam soil. So we've just kind of got a little bit of everything. And some of that has to do with elevation, some to do with kind of where it's at or where your slope hill is at. The east slope of the chapel gets this wind blowing loess soil. It's a little bit more of that little deeper lussy soil. And the west is just shallower. It's actually a little heavier. It's not a clay soil, but it's just kind of got a little more of that mature soil about it, and then some rocks through it, and it's very, very interesting. So John,
what's going on in the vineyard right now?
What's that?
What's going on in the vineyard right now? Adrish wants to know.
Right now we're at well, today I was working on a nursery. We're going to start shoot thinning pretty soon. I know, Marshall, you've already started. You got a lot more acres to get over.
Monday.
So we're kind of starting that. Just the little shoots that we don't want. We're taking those off. Down the trunk, there's call them suckers. We eliminate those. And so we'll be going through that for quite a while now. We're kind of in between bud break and bloom. So we've got some blocks that are already out 4 or 5 inches of shoot length, and other blocks we kind of delayed the pruning to try to delay harvest actually. And some of those are just barely out. So yeah, that's kind of what we're doing right now. So and how about you, Marshall or Carrie? You guys?
Yeah. For us, like I said, we started shoot thinning a week ago. We started in our Cab Franc, but we're moving. We did our Merlot and Syrah. Now we're moving into the Cab, just getting ready to start in the Cab on Red Mountain and our other vineyards too. Actually, we're starting shoot thinning. Actually, one of the vineyards just tomorrow we're going to get started. So yeah, yep, that's kind of the main project right now. We've watered our vineyards all up just before bud break. So just here in the last, say 3 or 4 weeks ago, 3.5 weeks ago, we irrigated our vineyards. I like to water up the vineyards, fill up the profile before we see bud break, just to get things started off, and then we will shut the water off, and then we just monitor it from there too. So those are some of the things that we've been doing.
Okay, yeah, we're kind of watering things up right now, so I don't know, kind of getting over it. And we have so many coyotes running around; they're always chewing up our drip lines, so we've got a lot of repairs to do this time of year. So,
Always.
That's a question we get in the vineyard a lot. We actually we're the only vineyard that has our drip line up in the canopy, because it helps with the coyotes not chewing them. So when they're down low, they kind of makes a mess in the morning. They're like puppy dogs. They like to chew everything up. So anyway, I've got a question about Savage Grace's alcohol levels. Boy, he's like our earliest picker. He beats you out, David. So he's like super early. I don't know. I guess it depends on which wine you're talking about, but he's usually has really low alcohol as well. So
yeah, I think as you're talking about delaying harvest, pruning is a really interesting tool, but having that diversity of winemakers for us also really helps, because you get somebody like David who picks early, and you get those out of the way, and then you can wait for the people who want to pick later. Like, as you mentioned, Betts does pick later, and it really it helps that not everybody wants to pick at the same time and do everything at the same time, so that you can be responsive, and it enables us as growers to say, oh, you want to pick tomorrow? We can pick tomorrow. You want to pick in 2 weeks? We can pick in 2 weeks. And I think the really cool thing about the Yakima Valley, the good growers in the Yakima Valley, is that we do work really well with our winemakers. And I mean, I don't know when Owen Rowe came into Red Willow. They've been at DeBrule since '99, but they've been with you guys longer, right, John?
No, I think it was 2007. So.
Really? No, it's been longer than that.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it was. So yeah, they've been with you guys for a long time.
Huh.
That's great.
Well, even 2007, I mean, you get these long-term relationships with your winemakers, and it's really beneficial for everybody. And because we will grow a little bit for people that, I mean, when you work with David for as long as we have, we know how to grow grapes that are going to make the kind of wine that he wants, versus when you're growing for somebody else who's looking for something different. And that also leads into how do you manage all those micromanagement things that make everybody happy and make the wines that much better.
Yeah. And that's a good point. You know, that is, you don't just overnight know how to make a wine from a vineyard necessarily. It's kind of a long-term process, and we see guys kind of dialing it in every year a little bit more, and some of them have it dialed in pretty good. So I think David really does in this Chapel block and so many other wines he makes. But yeah, anyway.
So John, there's an interesting question that I want to know the answer to.
Okay.
So Keith wants to know, are you able to have a donkey to scare away the coyotes?
I don't know. What about a llama? Maybe that'll work. I think my wife wants an alpaca or something. She wants to make sweaters or something. So I don't know. I'm like, I don't want one. I've never heard of that. That's interesting. Yeah.
So, Marshall, here's a question. Do you have what clones of Syrah do you have? Are they the same that are in Red Willow, or are they different?
I was afraid you're going to ask me the clone of Syrah that we have. We have the Washington clone is the one that we have, and I'm trying to.
Red Willow clone.
Yeah, that was the most common clone that's grown in Washington. I've got a couple. I do have a small block, a 2-acre block for Mark Ryan that is, and I want to say it's 487 is the clone of Syrah that it is that I've got. But the majority of the stuff that I have at Quintessence is just the one that's grown the most here in Washington.
Okay, and who all do you sell Syrah to?
So Mark Ryan, they get the majority of the Syrah. Guardian gets Syrah. Succession Wines gets Syrah from us. Cascade Cliffs gets Syrah from us off Red Mountain. They're down along the Columbia. And then JM Cellars now. This will be his first crop off of his block of Syrah. And then we just took over Red Heaven. The Shaws, they bought the Red Heaven vineyard on Red Mountain. And so I have quite a bit of Syrah planted on that vineyard. And so I have a lot of small wineries that just get, a couple tons each that get Syrah from us too.
Yeah. So we sell to, you guys have more Syrah than we do, but we get some at Cobonneville, and David gets some for Owen Rowe, and Fortuity gets a couple tons. So they'll make just a little bit. But so yeah, it's an interesting, I always think it's fun to taste either Owen Rowe Red Willow versus DeBrule Syrah, or Red Willow Syrah from Owen Rowe versus somebody else. Or, I mean, it's interesting to taste around the valley, but it's also interesting to taste the same fruit in different winemakers, or the same winemakers with different fruit. Or, I mean, I always like to say more research is needed to know the answer.
It's to me, it's really interesting when you taste the vineyard. I like to go to tastings, and some winemakers will have some tastings. I've been to a couple of them that where we taste he makes the wines from, and all the same variety, whether it be Cab, Syrah, but it's from all the different vineyards that he gets fruit. And so he invites the growers to that. And so as growers, we all get to go taste everybody's vineyard. And it's very interesting to taste the wines from different vineyards. There's, the terroir, the different farming styles, where they're located, elevation. It's so interesting to taste the fruit from the different vineyards.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit about Syrah, where it came from. So David Lake, back when we were first going to plant it, Dad said, well, David, why don't you secure the material? And he called down to Joseph Phelps down in California, and he said, well, we got 2 Syrahs available, a Shiraz or the French Syrah. And David, being just who David was, said, give me the French one. So he got the French clone of Syrah, and I mean, it turned into it's such a great clone. We actually, a few years back, went into our old 86 block Syrah, and right before harvest, I just kind of flagged. I thought, this is the absolute best finds, just kind of looked at them and I don't know, flagged 100 of them or so. And then we went in that winter, made propagated cuttings from it. And so kind of a field selection of the better ones, after how many years of growing. And so then we went out and planted it. So that's kind of, more our newer Syrahs were kind of a selection of the old. So anyway, I think somebody asked a question, what some of the wineries, of course, Owen Rowe, get our Syrah, Owen Rowe, Gramercy, Betts, Structure, Curlew, Patterson, 8 Bells. They do a really interesting one. We have almost all Phelps clone Syrah, but we have a few rows of these other clones, and they actually do a wine that's the clone blend. So they kind of blend all the clones together. It's really interesting. I'm leaving out a few guys. I'm sure. I'm sorry.
I do that all the time. Happens.
Anyway, yeah. William Church. Okay. Are we out of time, Carrie?
Well, we've been at this for an hour and change. It looks like we're losing some people because we're getting to the end of it. So unless we have any other questions, I think we'll reconvene next week as we look at DeBrule, and Marshall and Jonathan will be here to talk about where their vineyards are at as well. And then we'll follow up in 2 weeks with Marshall and a deep dive into Red Mountain and Cabernet. And it will be interesting to taste. I think the next 2 wines will be fun because we're doing a DeBrule Vineyard Bordeaux blend, which is Cab dominant. It's about 60% Cabernet. And then we'll go to Red Mountain. You guys are confusing me, both being red. And and we'll taste a Red Mountain Cab. And I think the sense of place, both the sense of place and the winemaking are very different. But the sense of place between DeBrule and Red Mountain are so unique and different. And although you definitely see that between the Syrahs, it will be fun to taste them the same varieties or the same regional varieties side by side and have these discussions and continue to carry forward for the next couple of weeks. So thank you guys all for coming. And if we missed any of your questions, bring them back, ask again, and let us know what you thought. Let us know what else you want to hear next time. And we'll see you next week. So thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, you guys. Cheers.
Cheers.